Flags, uniforms, protests, cartoons.
Is there a culture war in schools?
Well, on tonight's It's Your
Your
Time.
time you're wasting.
We're going to be talking a little bit about some of the rather alarming scenes that we've seen unfolding this week. But Martin, start us off. Talk to us a little bit about flags.
Yeah, it's something Owen Jones was on Breakfast TV earlier this week talking about people having arguments about flags. And he was suggesting the reason that the government is pushing the agenda of having arguments about flags is to take other people's minds off various things that are happening in the country, like pay for nurses and all the stuff that upsets Owen Jones, clearly.
Yes,
Now,
and it's become quite popular amongst some people to say that there's no such thing as a culture war. It's all invented. It's fake news. But wasn't there something quite powerful going on with flags back in September last year?
yeah, so Pimlico Academy in
London.
Pimlico, funny
Yeah.
enough, in West London, I was going to say, had a Union flag outside its building. And come September last year, some pupils brought it on themselves to pull down the flag and take it to a nearby estate where a lot of them lived and set fire to it. Now, this was because of they had the right to protest, I suppose, but the flag still flies. Some people will be happy to hear, but people, of course, who don't drape themselves in various flags of various different hues might be upset to hear that it's still flying there. Pimlico Academy is the part of the academy chain run by Lord Nash, the Conservative peer.
Yeah, Futures Academies. I used to work with them a couple of years ago, and they weren't doing, as far as I can recall, they weren't doing the Union flag business then, but it's become quite a thing. For a while, they did a sort of daily ritual, didn't they?
Yeah, apparently after this flag burning episode, they did a sort of ceremony at the beginning and end of the day where the teachers would hoist it during the day and take it down. I don't know if it was there when the Queen was there or something like that. What it was, the headmaster is at home or the headmaster is at school. What it was meant to signify. But it's an interesting part of the culture wars, and the culture wars are something which is also happening in Yorkshire at the moment and at Batley
Batley
School.
Grammar
And
School. Yeah.
all the children have been sent home from Batley School because of protests outside, objecting to an RE lesson, which I think we can come on to. But the idea of culture wars is something, like I said, Owen Jones is saying it's all made up. But it goes back to a book perhaps by James Davison Hunter in 1991. He's a sociologist. And his book, Culture Wars, The Struggle to Define America. And of course, it all had to come from America. But he was talking about how progressive and conservative forces are locked in a different struggle now. Used to be about class, about economics. But now it seems to have moved due to identity politics. And people are finding themselves in various different alliances, perhaps alliances they weren't used to before. Just to give an example, the Harry Potter idea, perhaps. Whose side are you on in Harry Potter world? Are you on J.K. Rowling's side, or should you be burning the books of Harry Potter if they're in the school library? And should you be teaching 100 genders, or questioning the fact that there aren't perhaps 100 genders? So liberals and conservatives are being pulled left, right, and centre, and are finding it very difficult. So, what do you think of what's happening in Batley?
Well, it seems extraordinary, doesn't it? That obviously what's happened in Batley is that an RE teacher showed. We don't know which one. None of the reportage says what picture of Mohammed was actually shown. I'm sure it would be considered incendiary to speculate by showing various different cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. But a cartoon was sent, possibly the one that was in some Dutch magazines recently, or perhaps one of the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. And I can only assume that the teacher in question wasn't doing it to shock or provoke the students, but to initiate some sort of debate about what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable. Now, clearly, they've discovered to their cost that it wasn't acceptable to even to even show the image even in that carefully framed environment. And the head teacher at the school has apologised unreservedly. The teacher in question has been suspended, and I think some of what he said was that they're going to review whether or not they teach that particular aspect of the curriculum anymore, which does leave it somewhat up in the air as to whether this was a particular teacher going off on a limb or whether he was following a school's scheme of work. And we're not sure about that, really, are we, Martin?
The protesters on the outside have been recording interviews with various news outlets today and yesterday,
Mm,
and one of them was saying that he thinks that part of it was written by another teacher, perhaps the head of department or somebody, and therefore the teacher was carrying out the instructions. But he said the other teacher should go as well. So it's getting quite incendiary out there indeed. Um, Baroness Wolsey, the
yeah.
conservative, the ex-conservative chair, said, unfortunately, this matter has been hijacked by extremists on both sides to create this culture war. There we go again, as
Mm.
though the culture war isn't there. It's just people working hard to create it. What we're forgetting in all this is the most important party, which is the kids and their learning. And the kids, of course, because of the protests, have been sent home.
Yes, slightly. Fortunately, their teachers are fairly well used to remote learning because of recent events. But still, no
Perhaps if it
idea.
wasn't, yeah, if it wasn't for COVID, perhaps they wouldn't have been sent home. It wouldn't have been so easy. But
Maybe not. Maybe not.
the-
But this is all very much in contrast. Do you remember? I'm not sure when was it. Sometime last year, that teacher in France was had his head cut off after a similar incident.
yeah, so Samuel Paty, wasn't it?
That's right.
Um, Now that was a French schoolgirl complained about the cartoons being shown in her class, and her father then put various things complaining about it out on social media, which led to somebody um, ending up beheading or
Mm.
attempting to behead the teacher. It turned out, of course, that the child wasn't actually in the class that day and was complaining on behalf of others. So she hadn't actually seen them, so she couldn't have got offended by it. But that's by the by. Interestingly, President Macron
Right.
gave a Legion d'honneur to the teacher involved in that, and treating him as some sort of hero. Whereas here, the head teacher of his school has found has dismissed him and said
Wow.
and apologized
Is it
unreservedly on
dismissed
his
or
behalf.
suspended? It does rather look like this particular teacher's been thrown under the bus, but I'm not sure he's been dismissed, has he?
Sorry, suspended. You're quite
Yeah.
right with yeah, suspended with an ongoing investigation. But even then, to apologise and to suggest it wouldn't happen again is giving in a bit to the protesters who are outside, who have already begun to talk about other things, and they're calling on Muslims. And when I say Muslims, I don't think that every Muslim thinks in the same way, nor necessarily agrees with what some people are saying on their behalf, but they're calling on all Muslims to check through school curricula to find out what's being taught there, to see if it's offensive, and or particularly in relationship and sex education as well, which brings us back to the protests in Birmingham, which happened a couple of years ago about
Yeah,
homosexuality being taught in the school. And in the end,
in a primary school, yeah, yeah.
there was a court order to ban all protests outside the school. And perhaps we get to a point where no schools should allow, there should be protests outside no schools at all, a bit like, or have a certain distance so children can get to school. I think there's something
And
similar with Mary Stopes clinics and
yeah,
abortion
I think the issue in that
protests.
case was about the teaching of LGBT issues and that parents and community members were saying that students shouldn't be told anything about homosexuality or alternative lifestyles in that respect. And clearly, I think the way that particular debate was portrayed was that there's a school being progressive, trying to embrace new ways of understanding the world and to introduce its students to that way of thinking. And the parents and the community groups were caricatured as very repressive and out of touch with modern sensibilities. And I'm not sure that this debate or the protests at Batley are being seen in quite the same way, are they?
Well, I think some people are suggesting perhaps it's quite conservative. The people outside who are complaining about the blasphemy, that they see it now. Of course, blasphemy is not against the law in this country.
No,
Not anymore.
not
Anyway, it certainly
anymore.
used to be. But and I've got an interesting quote here from Ian Duncan Smith of
Oh yes.
Sir Ian Duncan Smith fame. If we ban everything that different groups don't like, it's going to be very difficult for teachers to teach. Now, I think he's quite right there. However,
And yet, yeah.
the same Ian Duncan Smith said in 2003, talking about Section 28 and whether it should be reintroduced, the anti-promotion of homosexuality law. I think it's right, he said, that the majority of parents should have an influence over what is taught in schools.
I wonder if he's changed his mind or whether he's,
He was hoping to allow parents to vote on what sort of sex education their children will receive, with possibly as few as 5% then having a veto on teaching materials. It sounds like the 2003 Ian Duncan Smith might have been protesting alongside the protesters outside Batley School.
well, almost. I guess the issue here is that each of us wants or doesn't want different things. So there are things which I might object to being taught in my children's school. I think there are definitely some things that I would be seriously concerned if I felt were being taught. If they were being taught, for instance, to espouse extremist views or uncritically introduced to certain ways of thinking, I'd feel quite upset about that. And I remember some months ago, last year, we had Calvin Robinson talking about this, didn't we? What was he saying?
Well, he was talking about having a debate on controversial issues, on issues which are open to opinion and open to interrogation in some ways. So, for example, would you teach there are 100 genders? Now, I
Mm.
know that there are some schools, because someone not a million miles away from me was taught this lesson at a school,
Well,
and that is that there are 100 genders. Now, certain things should be open to debate, and that some people think this and some people think that. An RE teacher, it used to be religious instruction. There was one true God, the one true way, one true light, and this is what you taught. This is what you
mhm.
thought. But in a liberal democracy, which is multi-faith, multi-ethnic, we have to have the debate. And that means uncomfortable things. For some people, Jesus is the Son of God. For other people, that is a blasphemy.
Yeah, yeah, no, very, yes, really difficult, and I think the 100 genders question, I'm quite happy, for instance, for that to be taught as some people believe this, and here's why they believe it, and here are the reasons that we might want to explore that. Perhaps this is a good way of framing the world, but for it to be taught as unequivocally true, I think is the problem that I would have. And this brings us back to this unfortunate RE lesson. And clearly, I say clearly, it possibly could have, with the benefit of hindsight, showing a cartoon which has upset a lot of people in the past was perhaps guaranteed to upset people again. That maybe not such an enormous surprise that has happened, but
Well, we don't know which,
we
like,
don't. We don't know for
yeah.
a fact about
So
what happened, but we do know that cartoons and any depictions of the Prophet Muhammad are offensive to particular Sunni Muslims, maybe not other sects of Islam, but not be able to have the debate about whether showing an image like that it should even be discussed or interrogated is perhaps part of our problem, is it?
especially as I'm sure a lot of these images are available to children to look up on the internet. It's not that they couldn't see these things, and it's important for children to be exposed in a safe environment. I would say a school is a safe environment to discuss certain things and to look at things in certain way. I mean, talk about culture wars coming over from America. I mean,
Mm.
there was the case, I think it's in a university, and I'm not 100% sure on the details of this, but it's lodged in my memory somewhere along the line, that a investigation at university about a lecturer who used the N word in a lesson, in a lecture, and the investigator, on reporting back and saying that this teacher should not have used the N word, used the N word, and was then under pressure to resign because he'd used the N word in quotation marks about a teacher using the N word. Now, I think he did resign in the end, or was pushed out because of that. Now, if I haven't got the facts right about that, then I do apologize. But it's part of this reportage. Here are some anti-Semitic images that the Nazis used in the Second World War and the when they came to power in Germany. Are we allowed to show those now? Are we saying that those are offensive and therefore we shouldn't look at those?
Yeah, yeah. No, I've recently encountered a school which had had an unfortunate incident where a teacher was reading John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, which has the N word in it, and he read that word aloud and was filmed doing so by some of the students in the class, and this was then released on social media. And the school's response was to ban the book.
And the teacher?
I'm not sure what's happened to the teacher. I don't think they've been dismissed. I'm pretty sure they haven't. But the, it's the decision taken is to blame the material that Of Mice and Men. Which, do you remember a few years ago when Michael Gove was upsetting people trying to or successfully changing the GCSE curriculum and deciding that American literature shouldn't form part of it, and there was a huge outburst from lots and lots of teachers who were very upset about no longer being able to, that particular book not being on the specific English literature specification anymore. And now, from then, just a few years ago, we now have a situation where the book itself is considered too offensive for students to have it read to them.
Well, this is the way that culture wars go, of course. You know, we are, and I think culture wars, by the way, have been around for centuries. I think culture is a place of discussion, debate, dialogue, and also straightforward animosity at points. And these pulling from pillar to post is certainly what is happening. But the important thing for me is getting students up to speed with the debate rather than saying that this is right, this is wrong.
Yeah,
Getting
absolutely.
them to make their own minds up in the world is quite important. Now, that can come across as something difficult for some more conservative elements of the community, particularly if you're talking about, you know, gay rights and gay relationships, and you're talking to people who are homophobic, or whose religion or their interpretation, should we say, of the religion is, you know, somewhat homophobic. When I worked in a Catholic school, the head teacher was fond of mentioning in assembly that we love the sinner, but we hate the sin. And talking about homosexuality in those terms, you know. Now, I don't know if you'd be able to say that nowadays. That you know, I think that would be probably rubbing up against the law somewhere.
Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure, Martin. But I think one of the interesting things that comes out of this idea of culture wars is that conservatism seems to move around. If we go back, if we return to the idea of the flag burning at Pimlico Academy, that who are the conservatives in that argument? Are the people who want to who are feeling offended by a particular image and wanting it to be taken away? Are they in the same camp as the community protesting at Batley Grammar? Or is the school, in insisting in flying the Union flag, is the school being oppressive?
Well, and it also depends on your view of the flag. I mean, Paul Gilroy's wonderful book, written, I think, in the 80s, There Ain't No Black in the Union Jack, was quite an interesting look at the way perhaps different communities look at the Union Jack, the Union
Mm,
flag, sorry, in this case. But for instance, the Welsh. the one part of the the four nations that is not included in it at all. Should there be a dragon in the middle of the Union flag? Some people ask. But it's interesting that the Guardian talked about Pimlico Academy this week, and a petition that some students have been putting together about the right to express themselves however way they choose, to have their natural hair, whether it be big hair, small hair, loads of hair, facial hair, or no facial hair.
Yes, the idea is that the school the new strict uniform policy is racist, because it's intolerant of, particularly the hair and the headscarves worn by people of colour, and quite extraordinarily, the students at the school say that they have the right to express themselves however they choose. Do they?
Well, it's an interesting point. Now, is their petition conservative, saying that their independent freedoms for themselves should be, and they allowed to express themselves, their
Well,
individuality?
it's quite libertine, isn't it?
Well, yeah, yeah, absolutely. But
Quite
whereas
alt-right.
the pupils at Batley School, some of them have started a petition to reinstate their teacher.
Right, right.
So is that
And
liberal,
that and that takes
or
us
is
back
that conservative?
to the furore at Eton last year with Mr.
Yeah.
Noland, sacked for, I think, expressing misogynist views, and there being petitions from the students at Eton that shouldn't be the case. I think he lost his appeal, didn't he? I'm not sure what happened with that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot about student voice now, which is quite interesting, and also in some independent schools at the moment, only independent schools, talking about the rape culture, the misogynist culture within various pupils that have raised concerns, and I think there's even been a strike. I might have got this wrong
Yeah,
in
there's some quite
Dulwich.
shocking stories about students who have been victims of sexual assault being asked to sign non-disclosure agreements and that sort of thing, which does sound like the sort of thing that I'd want to oppose, to be honest, Martin.
Yeah, I mean, and the hush hush culture of some schools, and so how the school and the public sphere comes together is certainly something that's going to be making waves more and more so, especially I think because of
It,
social media enables people to get in touch with a lot of people very, very quickly.
these are they're uncomfortable discussions for us, and I think some of the ideas about whether schools should have uniforms, whether schools should legislate over the hairstyles of their students. I think many people who work in schools in the UK feel very strongly that schools do have a responsibility to do these things. It's far less typical than other parts of the world. We're a relative outlier in terms of our attitudes to school uniform. And so, arguments about the fact that uniform standards are important to academic standards are fairly tenuous
Very.
to argue. It's much more about, well, is this an example of British culture? We wear uniforms at school here.
Well, it's certainly an interesting one. I'm not sure even where I stand on it.
No,
I certainly look at the England football team, and you would expect them to wear a uniform for reasons of knowing who to pass the ball to, which doesn't always succeed.
they have
But
the right to express themselves
belonging,
however they choose,
belonging is
Martin.
the idea. Showing a sense of belonging, showing a sense of badge, loyalty to the school. Whether that is just imposed by a uniform, of course, some people find a uniform very irritating about a school and perhaps have less loyalty because it's imposed on them. I do not know. But they're not just talking about, in the Guardian article, the pupils there aren't just talking about uniform, they're also talking about
The curriculum.
the curriculum as well. And particularly, some people are suggesting that the chronological study of history in, means that pupils don't learn about diverse aspects of world history, certainly for the first few years, where they tend to learn about white people, particularly kings and queens, and all references to BAME communities have been removed. Now, is that a deliberate ploy, or is that not true? I don't know, but it's certainly that schools and curriculum are becoming very, very politically hot at the moment, and the culture wars are the reason why, I suggest.
Well, it's in many ways, maybe it's a good. I think it's probably a good thing that we're asking these questions and are being concerned about whether the choices we're making in a school curriculum are representative in the way we'd want them to be. It's really important to have those discussions. What is far less palatable is the very real fear, I think, that teachers have, is that there's a wrong answer, and that if you get it wrong, there are pretty serious consequences.
Yeah, and how much should teachers be in fear that if they teach something that is then misconstrued or
Yeah, it's a
taken out of
really difficult one.
context?
There are clear lines that, as teachers, you know you don't cross, and the teacher in question at Batley Grammar, we've got no idea exactly what happened in that lesson. I'm assuming that this was a lesson and that was planned and taught, and as planned, and certainly in its conception was considered to be an acceptable thing to do. I think the idea there that any teacher working at that school now knows the school doesn't seem to have their backs.
And also, you have to be reflective and responsible to the community around you, but is it the full community that you're responsible to, or the very loud minority of the community who perhaps have always, in various different ways over the centuries, ensured that their views are the ones that hold sway over a local school?
Yeah,
But we can't tell. For me, I think the more perspectives that are taught, the better. It might have been this teacher was teaching perspectives, was teaching different ways of seeing and looking at the argument, which, as I said, is the RE teacher's lot these days.
yeah,
But if the teacher is really worried about what they teach and is now starting to say the perspectives, perhaps, well, we won't include certain things, then that reduces the richness of the curriculum. That reduces the experience of the curriculum for the pupils at the school. The other sneaking problem might be that perhaps somebody didn't like this teacher and perhaps was using this as ammunition to get at them. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened, but you could see how in a different situation, in a different school with a different teacher and a different pupil, it might be possible, a bit like the pupil in France who wasn't at a lesson to
mm.
cause an ultimate furore, that certain things could be caused by teachers being shopped by pupils who perhaps have different ulterior motives as to why they might do that. And then we have the whole culture war being used for very different aims.
And we're all held hostage to hearsay and accusation.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, we don't have any answers for any of this, but thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back.
Subscribe for more.
Subscribe for more. Thanks ever so much. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
You can cry and cry until your eyes are red. You can toss and